Have you ever wondered if everything you've carefully constructed through patience, determination, and quiet strength could crumble from just one person's return, someone from a past long forgotten? If you know what it's like to refuse to be diminished in a world that demands you be smaller, if you've defended your value without ever needing to shout, then this tale will resonate deeply. Because sometimes the fiercest threats arrive wrapped in elegance, and this particular storm had come back to take what no longer belonged to her. Dawn broke over Silver Creek the way it usually did, gentle, warm, and honeyed against frost-covered glass. In the back workspace of the boarding house, Ella Lenina Morgan worked at her sewing machine with practiced hands, her breathing even and her focus unwavering. Life had found a rhythm after the church gathering and Gabriel's healing. Business flourished beyond her capacity. Martha Webb would tease, "Soon you'll be hiring help, dear." Honestly, Ella had considered it. She wasn't simply the outsider from back east anymore. She'd become Miss Morgan, the talented seamstress who created work clothes for timber crews, altered Sunday dresses, and never refused assistance to any widow needing winter protection. It wasn't quite home yet, but it was approaching that feeling. Then the correspondence arrived. Martha delivered it, covered in fresh snow with a wax seal and carrying the faint scent of roses. Ella questioned with raised brows, "Is this for you?" Martha denied it, setting the envelope near Ella's shears. "It's addressed to Mr. Blackwood." Gabriel was expected around midday, planning to inspect timber shipments and approve new protective equipment. When he showed up with snow-caked boots and evergreen needles tangled in his scarf, Ella extended the letter with an amused expression. "Looks formal," she observed. "Someone secretly writing to you?" Gabriel's expression shifted subtly, not quite worried, not pleased either. Something undefined. He accepted the envelope carefully, examined the seal, but kept it closed. "Someone from years ago," he mumbled, tucking it away. "I'll look at it later." She didn't press him. She'd learned that lesson. Gabriel Blackwood was solid as timber, but even the strongest trees have their hidden complexities. That evening, after dinner and gentle conversation by the fire, Gabriel excused himself unusually early. "Early start at the camp tomorrow," he explained. "Need my rest." He departed, but Ella noticed the letter still gripped in his fingers. The following day passed without any sign of him. Strange, though not concerning. He'd been absent longer before. Still, an uneasy feeling nagged at her throughout the day, something about his expression. The way he'd left without a proper farewell. By day 3, she sensed something wrong. She found Martha observing her from the kitchen entrance. "Ever notice how the air shifts before a storm arrives?" Martha asked. Ella glanced up. "Always do." Martha nodded knowingly. "Might want to prepare yourself." On the 4th day, Gabriel came back. His typical composure remained, but it felt fragile, like someone testing uncertain ground. Over morning coffee, Ella finally spoke. "Will you share who sent that letter, or must I sow hints into your next pair of pants to discover the truth?" Gabriel grimaced before chuckling softly. "You have every right to know," he said gently. He retrieved the folded paper from his pocket as though it weighed pounds. "Her name is Margot Hensley. We were betrothed once." Ella steadied herself. "You nearly married her?" "Nearly. She came from Boston society, wealth and status. Her father made it perfectly clear I wasn't refined enough for their family name." Ella absorbed this slowly. "So why is she reaching out now?" "She claims her family is investing in frontier settlements, expanding their interests. She selected Silver Creek and arrives within the week." The sewing machine hummed steadily in the background. Ella studied her own hands. "Does she understand you're spoken for?" Gabriel met her eyes directly. "She will know." Outside, fresh snow began falling silently. But within Ella's chest, something awakened, not jealousy exactly, but the awareness that perhaps her struggles weren't finished. Not by a long stretch. The stagecoach rolled into Silver Creek just before Thursday noon, wheels grinding through the muddy snow as curious gazes turned throughout the settlement. Snow still blanketed the rooftops, and even the bitter wind seemed to hold its breath. As if equally intrigued, Ella Lenina Morgan waited inside the general store for a thread and button delivery when she witnessed it. Not just the coach, but the woman emerging from within. She wore a deep blue velvet coat with pearl buttons catching the daylight, a feathered hat positioned perfectly. Her footsteps made no sound on the wooden planks. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd never tripped. Never hurried, never been kept waiting. Had she come to establish a business, reclaim a former love, or demonstrate how admiration always demands less than genuine respect? Margot Hensley had made her entrance. Ella remained motionless, but her fingers tightened around the fabric bolt she held like protective armor. She observed as Margot surveyed the town center not with contempt, but with strategic assessment. Her gaze was calculating, measuring, until it settled on the boarding house. Margot tilted her head slightly, already envisioning improvements, lace window dressings, and polished brass details. Some people arrive carrying the storm, Martha Webb whispered beside her, appearing like smoke. She's that type. Ella stayed silent but felt the recognition deep in her bones. That evening, Gabriel arrived later than expected, his coat dusted with snow, looking as though he'd walked the entire distance instead of riding. "She's arrived?" he announced. "I noticed. She inquired about me. I'm certain she did." He paused, taking a measured breath. "Ella, I don't want her presence disrupting what we've created." She looked up from her pinning work. "Then ensure it doesn't." He didn't linger long. The next morning, Ella passed the mayor's quarters and spotted Margot inside, seated comfortably as though she'd always belonged. The morning after, she toured the vacant livery barn near the square. By the third day, it became official. Margot Hensley was launching a fashion boutique. Silver Creek's first, positioned directly opposite Ella's sewing room window. The community assembled to hear her presentation, with Prescott naturally at her side. She smiled while describing her vision: luxury textiles, European lace, seasonal offerings. Women listened with sparkling anticipation. Some applauded. A few already whispered her name like salvation. Ella stood at the crowd's edge, hands still, saying nothing. But when Margot looked up and caught her gaze across the plaza, neither blinked nor smiled, just assessed. That night on the boarding house veranda, Martha sat beside Ella, knitting with steady rhythm. "You could compete with her," she suggested. "Skill for skill, appeal for appeal." "I don't want competition," Ella responded. "I want to be valuable in my own way." "Excellent," Martha said, her needles pausing. "Because the moment you play by her rules, you've already lost." 2 mornings later, Margot appeared at the boarding house door wearing winter white and matching gloves. Her voice was cordial as she requested, "Might I have a word with Miss Morgan?" Ella guided her to the sitting room and offered refreshment. Margot declined. "I appreciate your craftsmanship," she began, folding her gloves delicately. "The townspeople speak well of you." "That's generous of them." "I imagine earning their confidence required considerable effort." "It required effort and authenticity." Margot angled her head. "Gabriel always appreciated authenticity, though I suppose being truthful becomes simpler once the past fades away." Ella's jaw clenched, but her tone remained level. "If you've come to evaluate me, Miss Hensley, I trust you've finished your assessment." Margot's lips curved slightly. "Oh, I don't evaluate. I observe. Though observation reveals quite a bit." She stood. "You possess an unusual quality, Miss Morgan. But quality isn't the same as staying power. Not in settlements like these." Ella rose to her full height, anchored like stone. "Staying power is constructed. Not everyone knows how to build." Margot's smile wavered briefly. "Then you're fortunate. Silver Creek already has its builder." With that, she turned and exited, the door closing softly. Ella remained standing, her pulse steady, though her hands shook not from fear, but from fire. That evening, Gabriel visited. "I heard she stopped by," he said. "She did. What did she say?" "More through silence than words." He moved forward, reaching gently for her hand. She withdrew it carefully, not from anger but from caution. "I need some distance right now," she said. He nodded. "I'll be here when you're ready." After his departure, Ella returned to her workspace. The oil lamp's glow flickered across the room. Her needle hovered over fabric momentarily. Then she picked it up and continued stitching. Because storms didn't always announce themselves with noise and fury. Sometimes they arrived dressed in expensive fabric. It began with murmurs, not the obvious loud variety. These were subtler, more poisonous. The kind that weave uncertainty into your daily routine without immediate notice. A woman averting her eyes too quickly at the mercantile. A regular customer who once lingered now rushing past with barely acknowledgement. A discussion that halted the instant Ella entered the church entryway. One morning, Mrs. Barrow, who had once thanked her tearfully for repairing her son's sole winter coat, crossed to the opposite sidewalk to avoid eye contact. By week's end, her sewing room was quieter than it had been in many months. Across the plaza, the sounds of construction rang out as Margot Hensley's boutique took form. Not a humble shop like Ella's, but a declaration. Large display windows, polished brass fixtures, fresh ivory paint. A sign hung from the canopy, Mason Hensley, opening soon. Ella attempted not to watch, tried focusing on her own projects. Needle forward, needle back, thread pulled to precise tension. But ignoring the shadow falling across her window proved difficult. It became harder when Ruthie Lang, a loyal patron, stopped by awkwardly mentioning she'd already purchased something from Miss Hensley's establishment for a special event. You understand? Ella forced understanding. Of course. Was she being replaced, forgotten, or simply quietly passed over by the same people she'd once served with hope? That night, she pricked her finger on the needle for the first time in weeks. Gabriel arrived late that evening, coat dampened by snow, boots heavy on the porch. Are you managing? He asked, noticing her rubbing her thumb. She's taken my customers, Ella replied without looking up. He frowned. Margot? She hasn't even opened officially, yet they're already choosing her. Ruthie Lang said she wanted something a bit more sophisticated. Gabriel leaned against the doorframe, silent momentarily. You've never sewn to compete. I've never needed to. A beat passed. She's not doing this to hurt you. Ella looked up sharply. Isn't that exactly what she's doing? He hesitated. She's here for business purposes. She's here for you. That landed heavily between them. Gabriel pulled up a chair. Want the truth? He said quietly. Margot was the first woman I imagined building a life with. Back in Boston, I believed we shared the same vision. But she wanted someone who knew how to maintain appearances, not challenge them. When her father made his offer marry her, manage their properties, I realized I'd be joining something, not someone. So I walked away. Ella listened without softening. And now? She's not here seeking love. She's here because I became someone significant without her. That's a wound certain people can't tolerate. And you waited until now to explain this? I didn't want her shadow falling between us. It already has? The following week, the town council announced the new vote tax incentives for businesses modernizing Silver Creek's reputation. The proposal was Margot's, naturally, with her boutique as the centerpiece. Ella didn't plan attending the town meeting. She didn't want to witness Margot commanding the front of the room as though she owned it. Didn't want to hear the subtle approval or watch people lean forward when Margot spoke. But Martha Webb had different plans. You're attending, she declared, arms crossed. And you're wearing that burgundy dress with the copper stitching. Ella raised an eyebrow. Why? Because they need reminding, Martha said. Reminding that you didn't arrive with silk and sweetness. You came with determination and skill and heart. That still matters. So Ella attended. The meeting filled the town hall, candles flickering against aged stone. Margot stood at the front in soft rose silk, her voice smooth as honey discussing revitalization, commerce, vision. Silver Creek is a location with unrealized beauty, she said, her eyes drifting deliberately across the room. But it needs refinement, structure, a new identity? A low murmur stirred not disagreement, curiosity. She turned gracefully, gesturing toward planning maps. The proposed development includes specialty retail corridors, a hotel addition, and an events center. Yes, some existing structures will be repurposed, but that's the cost of advancement. Ella's ears rang because one of the buildings marked in red ink, labeled for transition, was her sewing room. The silence that followed stretched uncomfortably. Then Gabriel stood. "I have a question," he said, voice calm but resolute. "Who determines what gets erased in advancement's name?" Margot smiled soft yet sharp. "Nothing is erased. Everything is transformed." Gabriel nodded. "Interesting. That's what they claimed when they demolished my grandfather's property to build a banker's office." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter moved through the crowd. Then Martha Webb stood. Then unexpectedly so did Ella. The room shifted. Every eye turned. She walked forward slowly, the floor creaking beneath each intentional step. "I arrived in this town with nothing," she began. "Not a recognized name, not a claimed family. Just thread, fabric, and capable hands." She turned to face them. "And I created something. Not just clothing, not just repairs. I created trust. I created roots. And now I'm told my modest sewing room is an obstacle." She paused, voice unwavering. "Progress is acceptable, but it shouldn't sacrifice the people who sustain this town when nobody else would. If you demolish what's genuine to construct something more attractive, you're left with empty glamour. So what kind of future are we choosing? One with refinement or one with foundation?" She stepped back. The room fell silent. Then someone applauded. Slowly, then another, then more. Margot's expression didn't change, but her hand resting on the table curled slightly. That night, Ella sat at her sewing table, candlelight dancing across unfinished work. Gabriel entered quietly, holding a folded document. "The vote is decided," he said. She didn't ask. She waited. The council rejected the proposal unanimously. Ella closed her eyes momentarily, not from relief, from burden lifting. "She remain," Gabriel added. "She claims she's staying indefinitely." Ella looked at him. "And you?" "I'm not going anywhere either." He stepped closer, setting the paper down. "I meant my words. I'm with you. I'll stand beside you, even in silence." "Especially then." Ella nodded, eyes softening. But before she could respond, a loud crack echoed from outside. Then shouting, then smoke. Gabriel rushed to the door. Ella followed immediately. Across the square, Mason Hensley was ablaze. Flames curled against the night sky like ribbons of rage, crimson and gold consuming everything Margot Hensley had constructed. Mason Hensley burned rapidly, alarmingly fast. Ella stood in the frigid air, breath visible, heart racing. People flooded into the square with buckets, shouts, panic. Gabriel ran toward the flames without hesitation, seizing a pail from the pump and organizing others into a line. Martha moved toward the boarding house, guiding children inside. Away from when-carried embers. Margot stood frozen at the square's edge, silk nightrobe billowing in the wind, eyes wide and unblinking. Ella moved instinctively. She crossed the square, reached Margot's side, and grasped her wrist firmly. "We need to retreat," she said, voice clear. Margot didn't resist, just stared at the inferno as though witnessing divine retribution she hadn't anticipated. They backed away together as flames consumed lace curtains and polished wood. Glass shattered like a dream's ending. By the time the bucket brigade slowed, the boutique was a charred skeleton, smoke ascending to the stars. No casualties, but a symbol had vanished. The next morning, Gabriel found Ella in her sewing room pinning fabric to the dress form he'd gifted her. "You didn't sleep," he observed. She shook her head. He watched her extensively before speaking. "They believe it was the chimney. Faulty construction. But some people are suggesting other explanations." Ella looked at him. "You mean Prescott?" He nodded. "He's been spreading rumors since the vote didn't favor him. You'd expect losing influence would silence a man, but some only know how to whisper accusations." She pressed a seam flat with her palm. "Let him gossip." Gabriel stepped closer. "What you did pulling her from that square, standing beside her while everything she clung to turned to ash, that mattered. She would have done the same. No, Ella, she wouldn't have. That's the distinction. Margot didn't depart town immediately. For days, she stayed in a modest room above the old newspaper office, hair tied back, eyes weary. She didn't smile or request assistance, but she didn't refuse when it was offered either. One afternoon, she arrived at the boarding house unannounced. "I'm not rebuilding," Margot said without preamble. "Not here." Ella stepped aside, allowing her entry. "I came west believing I was pursuing a new empire," Margot continued, sitting stiffly on the couch's edge. "What I discovered was that I never learned how to remain still, never learned how to let anything grow." "You did," Ella didn't interrupt. Margot set a document on the table. "That's the deed to the boutique property. I'm transferring it. You decide what to do with it." "Create something lasting." Ella blinked. "Why?" "Because for the first time, I envy someone who earned what I've always demanded." She stood to leave, paused at the door. "Tell Gabriel I never resented him," she said. "I just resented who I couldn't become." Then she departed without looking back. Weeks passed. Spring arrived, gradually melting snow, crocuses blooming near the chapel fence. The town softened again, reshaped by trials, by fire. By choices. Ella transformed the charred boutique frame into a garden initially. A space for flowers and benches where women could gather, mend, converse, dream. Then behind it, she and Gabriel constructed something else, stitch and root. A sewing house, a trade workshop, a place for apprentices and stories passed between stitches. For young women who stood tall and refused to diminish themselves, Gabriel carved the sign by hand. On opening day, the town arrived. Not everyone, but enough. Children tugged their mother's sleeves. Men tipped their hats. Even Ruthie Lang brought dessert. Ella stood on the porch in her copper-trimmed burgundy dress, Gabriel beside her. "Still anxious?" he asked. "No," she said. "Not anymore." He smiled. "You're not just visible now, you're recognized." She nodded. "And not just as the tall woman." "No," he agreed. "As the one who remained, the one who built." Tall, resilient, compassionate. She had been all three, and finally she didn't need to apologize for any of it. They stood there a while, watching the townspeople enter. The sun bathed everything in gold, and for the first time truly, Ella Lanina Morgan didn't feel like she was borrowing space in the world. She had claimed it, thread by thread, word by word, choice by choice. She had made it hers.